Hi, and welcome to Creston Valley Curiosities, a video series from the Creston Museum where we explore the fun, fascinating, intriguing, and sometimes unbelievable stories of the Creston Valley. My name is Tammy. I'm the curator of the museum, and today I'd like to take you to the Kokanee Inn. The Kokanee Inn is quite possibly the oldest commercial building still standing in Creston, and digging into its history has been fascinating. It has taken me on a deep dive into provincial liquor laws, societal change, and economic ups and downs. It's actually pretty amazing how the history of the Kokanee Inn reflects all of those things. We know from stories and articles written decades ago by local longtimers that the hotel was built in 1898 by George Munro, who named it after himself. It was part of a building boom triggered by the arrival of two railways, the Great Northern Railway at the bottom of the hill and the CPR at the top. But for all that certainty, the first few years of the Munro Hotel are a bit murky. Municipal directories from 1898 and 1899 list 6 different hotels in Creston. Not one of them either named for or operated by George Munro. He doesn't show up until 1900. And by that time, we're up to 8 hotels, plus one the longtimers refer to as the headquarters, which was likely a boarding house of some kind for the crews building the Great Northern Railway. Now that does not mean the hotel doesn't exist. Those early hotels open, close, and change names and ownership with dizzying speed, and we don't know where they all were exactly. It is entirely possible that one of the hotels listed in the early municipal directories is in fact the Munro, just operating under another name or temporary owner. Also, one of our sources for the hotel's early history tells us that the Munro was originally much smaller than we see it here. And we can see from photos that that is true. It did gradually expand. This photo, taken between 1907 and 1909, we'll just ignore the incorrect date marked on it, clearly shows 4 sections to the hotel. The big corner section, a large section with 3 dormer windows, a square-fronted section on the end, and this skinny little section in between with its patched-on bay window. But this photo, taken a couple of years earlier, is missing the lowest section. It's hard to see because it's so close to the edge of the photo, but if you look carefully, you can see that the architectural details stop and there's a noticeable gap before the next building. So it's possible that 2 of all those hotels listed in 1900 are on the lots that we see occupied here by the Munro. And Munro himself shifts about. In 1901 and 1902, for example, he's listed as the owner of the Queen's Hotel, but by 1903, he's back at the Munro. Now, you may be asking yourself if Creston really has a need for 9 different hotels. The answer is no, probably not. But then, the whole point of a hotel in 1900 is not to provide a place for people to sleep. The whole point of a hotel is to provide a place for people to drink. British Columbia, in its mining days, has a serious drinking problem. In the late 1890s, BC's consumption of alcohol is nearly twice the national average. Here's an example of a wine menu from 1906. It offers 2 champagnes, 4 clarets, 1 each of white wine, sherry, and port, Guinness stout and 2 other beers, 5 Scotch whiskies, 1 Irish whiskey, and 3 rye whiskies, a Kentucky bourbon, 5 gins, a rum, and a brandy, and 5 other liqueurs. And where is all this available? On a boat. The SS Moyer, one of the CPR steamships operating on Kokanee Lake. This is what is considered necessary to get men, And I remind you, drinking in public at this time is strictly a male privilege. This is what's needed to get men from Kokanee Landing at the south end of the lake to Nelson. Now, in an attempt to crack down on drinking, the government decrees that saloons, the #1 source of alcohol, must be located in a hotel. That's why we have so many hotels in Creston. The government is hoping that the expense of operating a hotel will dissuade potential saloon owners from opening up. Clearly, that does not work. By 1907, though, things are settling down. We only see 2 hotels at a time. One might be the Queen's Hotel, going through a couple of names and owners before becoming the Creston Hotel, and the other is the Munro. It, and Munro himself, seem to be here to stay. It's sprawling halfway down the block in 2 directions and providing space for the original home of the Bank of Commerce, a grocery store, and a clothing store, and possibly headquarters of Dr. Henderson's new medical practice. Munro is taking an interest in the community beyond his hotel, too. In October 1908, for example, he and CPR Land Commissioner J.S. Dennis are busily laying a large pipeline from a reservoir on Goat Mountain to the town site. This is undoubtedly part of the Goat Mountain Waterworks system, of which Munro is vice president. And his involvement with that company is equally undoubtedly why his hotel in 1910 can boast washrooms and hot and cold running water, while chief rival Creston Hotel, right across the street, cannot. But in March 1910, rather abruptly, Munro sells the hotel to William Burton, who promptly renames it after himself. The newspaper article that announces the sale gives no details as to why Munro sells, but we get one possible clue the following August. Munro, it appears, is in debt up to his eyeballs. This is a notice of judgment against George Munro. The Creston Mercantile Company, one of our local general stores, actually has to take him to court to recover the $1,530, approximately $39,000 today, that he owes them. Changes to the provincial liquor laws probably add further incentive to Munro's decision to sell. In an attempt to curb the hotels and the liquor trade even further, the provincial government rolls out a whole new series of regulations in 1910. Hotels need to have a minimum of 7 rooms, each at least 100 square feet and suitably furnished. They need to have affiliated stabling for at least 6 horses. Amenities must include separate dining room and guest sitting room, kitchen, pantry, and storeroom facilities, accommodation for staff and their families, and proper ventilation, sanitation, and fire prevention arrangements. All of this has to be distinctly separate from the bar room and up to the rather discretionary satisfaction of a newly appointed liquor inspector. Hotels, in other words, now actually have to be hotels, not merely fronts for saloons. That's undoubtedly why we only see 2 hotels and 1 boarding house in the 1910 municipal directory, and why we see virtually no mention of the commercial hotel at all, even though we know it exists. It's also probably why Burton embarks on an ambitious renovation program immediately after buying the hotel. He does have the advantage of having McCreath's livery stable right behind his hotel, but he still has to put in a bigger dining room, up-to-date range in the remodeled kitchen, a couple of sitting rooms, an enlarged bar, redone office area, and overhauled bedrooms. These changes, both to the liquor laws and to the hotel itself, reflect a new role for hotels in the community. Instead of being icons of a rough and ready mining boomtown, they are now becoming symbols of the town's stability, prosperity, and respectability. The newspaper, the Creston Review, commends Burton and others like him as enterprising citizens, demonstrating in the most practical and convincing manner their faith in the future of the town. It's no accident that the two hotels, the Mercantile and the Bank of Commerce, the largest and most prosperous looking buildings in town, are clustered around the train station. That schools and churches are easily visible to anyone passing through, and that real estate offices are prominently located in the hotels. It's also no accident that the location of the train station gives a great view down the main street. And that is precisely the reason why this is one of the most photographed views in Creston's history. We have photos of it in winter, spring, summer, some with horses, some with pedestrians, one with a big old cow in the middle of the street. If you come in on the train and have only a few minutes before it leaves again, this is the one photo of town that you can take. It's marketing through architecture, and the message is clear. This is the place you want to be. Even the name of the street itself plays a part in this. 4th Street is actually Creston's first street. They just call it 4th Street to make the town seem bigger and more prosperous than it really is. The Burton Hotel quickly becomes a central feature in the town's daily life. Its 3 large sample rooms are not only places for traveling salesmen and professional men to offer their services, they also host everything from a Girls' Guild bake sale and the Ladies' Aid whist drives to temporary offices for the local MPs and MPPs, that's Member of Provincial Parliament. The dining room welcomes banqueters for the newly formed Creston Board of Trade in 1910 and the Erickson Creston Rifle Club the same year. The Old Timers Club dines there in 1911. The hotel serves as a backdrop for one of the most exciting events to happen in Creston in 1912, the arrival of the Rio car making its first transcontinental auto trip. William Burton himself is an important supporter of the community, making donations to Labor Day sporting events and an exhibit at the Vancouver National Apple Show, and being one of 10 public-spirited businessmen who shares the $1,200 cost of purchasing the land for a park, which eventually becomes Centennial Park. But this seeming prosperity doesn't last. By February 1912, Burton transfers ownership to a new consortium, the Creston Trading Company. It consists of himself, his longtime business partner Joe Jackson, A.C. Bonus, a wholesale liquor dealer at Cranbrook, and William Cameron, conductor on the CPR, as well as A. Mutz, the Fernie brewer. It's possible that economic considerations play a role in this. All those men have very good business reasons for investing in a hotel, and Burton, after all the expense of buying and renovating it, likely has plenty of incentive to welcome their investment. A year later, though, Burton severs all connection with the hotel and takes up fruit ranching instead. The hotel goes through a series of managers and employees in rapid succession, moves the bar into the rotunda to save costs, and finally, in May 1918, it closes. Joe Jackson has it up for sale by August, and the following spring, all the interior contents are sold at a Calgary auction. The King George, as it's known by then, is a victim of Prohibition. The temperance movement is quite strong in Creston even before Prohibition begins. Families are signing temperance pledges. The Women's Christian Temperance Union is active by 1910, and there's even a citizens committee consisting of church ministers and businessmen investing allegations that youth and interdicted people have been obtaining liquor at Burton's Hotel. The committee, not content with simply investigating the matter, is actively aiding the prosecution and providing sworn statements. Now, there is some grumbling when Prohibition is implemented in 1917, but not enough to really lament the consequent loss of the hotels. The newspaper doesn't even report the closure of the King George until a year after the fact, And all it has to say about the closure of the commercial hotel in 1923 is, Creston is now back to a one-hotel town. Even after Prohibition is repealed in BC in 1921, there doesn't seem to be much enthusiasm. Even though provincial laws allow beer parlors after 1924, individual communities have to vote on whether to allow them within their jurisdiction, and the earliest such vote we see anywhere in the Creston Valley is in Erickson in 1929. It is turned down. Creston doesn't get around to even asking that question until December 1935. In the meantime, there is a government liquor store, and even though it is a bleak and forbidding place, and a special permit is required to buy anything there, it, and the elderberry wine that people can make for themselves, seem to be meeting people's needs. To be sure, the newly established Legion is agitating pretty loudly for a hall, but whether that's because they need a hall for their still fairly young and active membership, or because veterans associations are considered private clubs and can therefore get licenses to sell hard liquor, well, the newspapers don't give us any details about that. But without a liquor license, or even any possibility of one, Joe Jackson's attempt to sell the old hotel is uphill work. The only interest we see in a decade is from the Women's Institute, who briefly consider buying the King George as a new home for the Creston Public Library, after its original home is destroyed in a terrible windstorm in December 1924. To give you a bit of an idea just how lucrative the liquor license is to the hotel business, in 1910, when William Burton bought it from George Munro with a liquor license, he paid $25,000 for it. But when Bruno Morabito finally buys it in 1928, without a liquor license, the reported selling price is a mere $500. Still, Morabito continues the tradition started by his predecessors of keeping the King George in the midst of community activities. He's a member of the committee who finally, after 15 years of fits and starts, gets a Boy Scout troop organized. He also helps establish the Creston Valley Athletic Association, whose first order of business is organizing a baseball league and grading the playing field at Exhibition Park. Exhibition Park is what we now call Centennial Park. It is the park that William Burton helped buy 23 years earlier. The hotel becomes a regular meeting place for the Board of Trade, the Stock Breeders Association, and fine annual banquets following the Armistice Day ceremonies. These reflect Morabito's own interests. Although he's not involved with the stock breeders, he is a veteran of the First World War, having served with the 49th Canadian Battalion, and in 1932 he becomes a member of the Board of Trade. Ironically, at his first Board of Trade meeting, he votes on a resolution to name a committee to report on the installation of a municipal sewer system, as the present system of putting in cesspools is anything but satisfactory. And a year later, he himself is being served with a petition, signed by 20 ratepayers in the vicinity, to abate the nuisance caused by the cesspool at the King George Hotel. Mrs. J. A. Bell, who runs the dining room at the King George for a couple of years, puts in a piano for entertainment, advertises room and board for $10 per week, and launches an innovative new service: take-out fish and chips. Jim Nastasi, Bruno Morabito's brother-in-law, opens his Sunrise Bakery in the King George block in 1931. And there are evidently some rooms available for travelers, because that's where W. H. Cross and Jarl Grubstrom stay when their cross-country midwinter airplane flight runs into a series of snowbanks and gets stuck here for the better part of a month. Nevertheless, the King George is becoming more of a rooming house than a hotel catering to travelers, as is the case with the commercial hotel half a block down the hill and Creston Hotel across the street. But the Creston Hotel burns in 1931, and Frank LaBelle, who is operating it at the time of the fire, leases the King George. New management calls for a new menu, and a sumptuous one at that, though the prices definitely reflect the challenges of running a hotel at the height of the Depression. Frank LaBelle will operate it until 1945, and it is he who finally applies for a beer parlor license following a successful plebiscite on the question in December 1935. He's got stiff competition in that matter from John Sheen, who, within 2 weeks of the vote, is not only applying for a beer parlor license, but also issuing tenders to construct a whole new hotel to house it. Jack Schwartz, current owner of the Kokanee Inn, tells me that LaBelle beat out Sheen in the license race by 1 day. Now, we do have 2 interior photos of the King George Hotel bar. One is dated the 1920s and the other 1930s, but I don't think either of those dates can be right. I suspect what we really have is one photo of the bar when George Monroe had it, and another photo after William Burton's renovations. They cannot possibly be from Frank LaBelle's era, because first, the customers are holding drinks that are clearly not beer glasses, and secondly, the customers are standing. The spittoon here tells us that they are not merely posing for a photo, they are intended to stand at the bar and drink. Remember, Frank LaBelle owned the hotel after 1924, when provincial liquor laws were established to govern beer parlors. Those laws were intended as a compromise. They allow public drinking, but at the same time make it as unenjoyable and unsociable as possible in order to discourage drinking. Among the rules, absolutely nothing can be sold except beer. No hard liquor, no tobacco, no snacks or meals, no soft drinks or coffee. Customers must remain seated at all times. They can't even carry their beer from one table to another, and approaching the bar is a definite no-no. There can be no entertainment of any kind, no gambling, no TVs, no music, not even women. All staff must be male, unless they happen to own the business. Some of you may remember the Kokanee's reputed resident ghost, Edna Shuleka Hornseth, working in the bar. But she owns the King George from 1954 to 1970. All other women, wives, girlfriends, and single women, are restricted to a separate section of the bar with a separate entrance and, from World War II onwards, a mandatory 6-foot-high wall separating them from the men's side. Even these calendars reflect that. Hunting and fishing scenes, very masculine activities, certainly at that time. These calendars are intended to appeal to a mostly male clientele. It's only in the most recent calendar, after liquor laws are relaxed, that we see designs intended to appeal to women. Just as an aside, it's also really cool how we can see major changes in Edna's life, such as her husband's death and the expansion of her business interests in these calendars. We can also see the passage of time and technology in the phone numbers. But getting back to the King George Hotel, what all these rules add up to is one of history's great ironies. The provincial government is trying to limit drinking by creating spaces in which there is literally nothing to do but drink. And you don't even get a choice of what to drink. A beer parlor is licensed to sell one type of beer and one type only. Your only choice is whether it comes in a bottle or a glass. If that's not enough, every week, beer parlor owners receive a new interdiction list of everyone in the province who is forbidden from consuming alcohol. Every week, more people are added, and every week, a few people are removed. It's up to the beer parlor staff to keep track of them all. It's also up to staff to enforce all the other rules whether their customers agree with them or not. In an era with little protection for workers who are injured on the job, it's not surprising that we hear stories from across the province of beer parlor staff choosing not to personally intervene when the customers get a little unruly. So, take a bleak environment with nothing to do but drink, add in hard-working farmers and loggers and sawmill operators blowing off a long week and bringing any workplace grievances with them, mix in employees maybe hesitant to get physically involved. That is a recipe for trouble. It doesn't help at all that Creston, by the late 1960s, is starting to face economic stagnation. The massive post-war economic boom is fading. People wealthy enough to move away are retiring to the coast and the Okanagan, and worldwide forces in the lumber industry are impacting the community's largest employers. It will take another 25 years before the downtown sawmill closes completely, but the economic writing is on the wall. Add financial worries to an already volatile mixture, and it's no surprise that the old King George gets a new nickname, the Bucket of Blood. Physically, the building is starting to show its age. A lot of the architectural detail from its days as the Monroe and Burton Hotel have been removed for easier and cheaper upkeep. At some point, probably in the 1940s, one of the middle sections is removed. That might be the result of a fire that damages that section but didn't spread to the others. Later on, though, that section is replaced. There might be a second fire, too. I've heard about one that damages the kitchen from people who are too young to remember the one in the 1940s. By the early 1980s, although the building still runs down the lower part of Canyon Street, the main facade and the entrance now face 9th Avenue, and the building's former place within the main business district is gone. Lots of people recall coming into town up Archibald Hill, turning at Centennial Park, and coming up the hill past the old King George. But very few people remember anything else being in the building that was once home to so many businesses and organizations. The old King George, run down as it may be, fills a vital need for affordable housing. When Rolly and Lou McNeil and Wally and Edna Graves buy the place in the mid-1940s, both families, including 5 kids, live in the hotel until they can afford to buy houses. This is fairly typical. When Bruno Morabito bought it in 1928, he also lived in it, and the Beningers lived down the street in the commercial hotel that they owned for years. The rest of the 36 apartments at the King George, through at least 8 sets of owners, are rented to long-term tenants. I've heard one apartment described as a bedsit with a washstand, which implies a single room sharing a bathroom with other tenants. But Anita Wellspring recalls her mother-in-law, Irene, living in a regular apartment in the King George. Separate kitchen, living room, bedroom, closet, and bathroom, adding up to a space considerably larger than a typical hotel room. The King George is not alone in this role. Seniors' homes, Swan Valley Lodge, for example, is only just being built in 1967, and other seniors' care facilities are still a couple decades away. So old hotels and other large buildings fill the gap as housing for seniors and others in low-income brackets. The original hospital up on 11th Avenue is one, as is the commercial hotel and an apartment building on the site of the former Creston Hotel. Len Ringstad remembers a big old farmhouse in Erickson near 25th Avenue also being a long-term rooming house for single men. One thing I can't find during this time is the kind of community involvement that marked the early years of the hotel. Wally Graves and Rolly McNeil do sponsor a bowling team that, in 1949, wins the East Kootenay Championship, but I haven't found anything else like that. Someone did tell me that the Kokanee Inn sponsors the Kokanee men's hockey team that played in the same league as the Lister Royals and the Creston Oilers. But the Kokanees are actually sponsored by the Columbia Brewery. It's possible liquor laws have something to do with this lack of community involvement. But better times for the old King George are ahead. In the early 1970s, two retired policemen buy it, Wayne and Nolan. Nobody seems to remember their last names, but everyone agrees they completely changed the reputation of the place when they changed the name to the Kokanee Inn. In a matter of months, as Bruce Chappell recalls, people view it as the place to go. Changing liquor laws help with this. For one thing, the crazy keep women separate laws disappear in 1963, though I'm told the sign over the ladies and escorts entrance stays up for another decade or so for nostalgia's sake. New liquor laws also allow for community pubs, a completely different atmosphere from the beer parlors, and, wonder of wonders, food and entertainment are allowed. In June 1982, when Harry and Marge Smith buy it from Jeff and Charmaine Proudfoot, the menu includes deep-fried chicken, shrimp, oysters, and JoJo potatoes, and you can even buy a drink other than beer. And a lower legal drinking age in BC than in Idaho brings in a whole new clientele from Bonner's Ferry. There's still a fairly rapid succession of owners. Wayne and Nolan have it for 8 years, Proudfoot's for 4, Smith's for only 2 before they sell out to Lyle and Cheryl Felker, who have it for only 1 year. Clearly, despite the relaxing liquor laws, running a pub is no easy task. But in 1983, Jack and Lynn Schwartz, along with Jack's brother Harry and partner Roger Rickards, buy it. There are more changes in store. The apartments are gone, and the annex, the original section that faces Canyon Street, comes down in 1998, just as the old hotel marks its centennial. The old King George Hotel has witnessed a lot of changes in Creston. It has undergone a lot of changes, too, in its 125-year history. It's hard to recognize today, but the original Monroe Hotel lives on in today's Kokanee Inn. Hopefully, it will see many more changes before it's done. Thank you for joining us for this installment of Creston Valley Curiosities. We welcome your support and hope to see you next time.